Hello and welcome to Literacy Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Lundy Swift. I am thrilled to have two incredible guests on our show, Dr. Stephanie Stollar and Sarah Brown. Dr. Stollar is the founder of Stephanie Stollar Consulting LLC and the creator of the Reading Science Academy. Dr. Stollar is a part-time assistant professor in the Reading Science program at St. Joseph University and a founding member of a national alliance for supporting reading science in higher education. As a board member for the Innovations in Education Consortium, she collaboratively plans the annual MTSS Innovations in Education Conference. She has provided professional development, conducted research, and published in the areas of assessment, early intervention, and collaborative problem solving. She is passionate about improving educator knowledge and aligning school systems to prevent reading failure. Dr. Sarah Brown is the president of System Impact Consulting and the co-author of the books Effective Universal Instruction and the new book MTSS for Reading Improvement. She empowers schools to maximize reading growth through data-driven MTSS with her MTSS Data Academy, and she has served in roles including the Bureau Chief Leading Special Education and MTSS Implementation for Iowa, Special Education Director, Professional Learning Administrator, and school psychologist. She's led customer education and MTSS within K-12 education technology companies. Well, welcome to the show, Sarah and Stephanie.
Thank you, Cheryl.
It's great to have you guys. And you have a brand new book out. Can you tell me what it's called and why you think it's important for every educator to read it?
The book is called MTSS for Reading Improvement, a Leader's Toolkit for Schoolwide Success. It was just recently published by Solution Tree, and we hope that educators will read it because it will help them to move beyond just thinking that the science of reading is professional development and that's all that they need to do. And hopefully it will support them to improve outcomes, that even if they have been engaging in professional development, even if they have implemented new instructional practices, if they aren't getting results, they're not done yet. And so we want to support that change that's happening in schools.
Yeah. Both Stephanie and I wrote this book because as we go to schools, we see lots of schools that are investing a lot of time and money into learning about evidence-based reading instruction, which is fantastic. And then we work with folks who are really frustrated and overwhelmed. They haven't seen their data grow as they would expect. And so this book was really trying to fill a void in the resources for school leaders around how to think about your reading improvement as a system to really start to get some more gains from all that hard work that schools are doing.
You know, Sarah and Stephanie, I literally this morning got a question from one of my colleagues. She's been visiting some schools who are having issues and say they have more tier 2 students, more tier 3 students than they have ever seen. And so she said, Cheryl, what do you think it is? And I gave her what I think is a laundry list of things that I think. But one of them was the role of tier 1 instruction. So I think before we even talk about MTSS, I think it's important for our listeners to hear what you guys think about the role of tier 1 literacy practices and how they play a role in student success. And what should we actually be seeing happening in every K-3 classroom?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'm glad that that's what you brought up to your colleague first. I wrote a book about tier 1. And so it's very near and dear to both Stephanie and I's work. We both spend a lot of time focused on tier 1. So the first thing I would say is that when you think about the pyramid, I know I'm answering a little bit about MTSS, Cheryl, but
okay.
But please bear with me. When you look at that pyramid, I don't encourage schools to think about students in the pyramid. So when your friend said, we have a lot of tier 2 students, we have a lot of tier 3 students, we often hear the phrase, we have an upside down pyramid. It leads us to some faulty thinking. And so I'd like you instead to think about the pyramid as containing all of the resources in your school. And some students will need to just access the resources in tier 1 to be successful, whereas other students will need to access resources in tiers 2 or tier 3 in order to grow and accelerate their growth in reading. And what happens when we think about our students as being tier 2 or tier 3 students is we think, we need a lot more interventions. And we need more interventionists. Where are we going to find all this time? Where are we going to find all these people? In reality, these random intervention resources aren't falling from the sky in the districts, at least that I get to work with across the country. And instead, we really need to focus on where we have the most resources, which is tier 1, to meet the needs of the vast majority of our students. And so when you ask, what's the role of tier 1, it really relates to that. Tier 1 needs to effectively meet the needs of the vast majority of students in any grade level in order for any intervention resources you have to be effective at closing achievement gaps. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And so what I would want to see is evidence-based instruction, high quality materials being used, teachers with expertise in both the science of reading, but also how and when to intensify instruction when it's needed for students in their classes, as well as a system of support around teachers to be able to effectively use their data, to be able to collaborate around challenging situations, and to be able to have what they need in order to be able to serve the students in their school, in their classes.
That is such a paradigm shift to no longer think about your students when it comes to that pyramid, whether it's upside down or not, but instead to think about the resources. I really, really love that. Stephanie, would you add anything to what we should be seeing in every K-3 classroom for tier 1 instruction?
Yeah, when it comes to that ELA block in tier 1, some big ideas to think about can be guided from the simple view of reading. So we should see every student in K-3 learning about the structure of printed words. So learning orthography, morphology, syntax, learning to lift those words off the page and practicing in controlled decodable text. And we should see every student engaging in rich conversations about language that is beyond what they can read themselves. So read aloud every day in every K-3 ELA block, so that students are engaging with content and with vocabulary and with language structures that are beyond the text that they are reading themselves, and hopefully also writing about what they are listening to the teacher read aloud. So those would be some big ideas that we would want to see every single day.
I love that. It's so important. And, and I tell you, I'm really proud of the decodables we have at Learn Without Tears, because they're highly decodable, and they're, again, specific to the skill that they're learning, but they're also really fun and engaging. They're not the old decodables that we may have used from back in the day. It's all about science and social studies. So I really, really like that. So again, when we think about that, it's not boring anymore, right? Stephanie, right. I think that's important as well. So, we've been saying MTSS, but I want to make sure that people know what we're talking about. Some people know about that pyramid that we've been talking about, Sarah, and some folks don't. So can you tell me what the MTSS framework is? What does it stand for? And really, I'd love for you to go into how a well-implemented MTSS framework really supports literacy development for all of our students.
Well, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports, and it is a framework for school improvement. It is a model that goes beyond literacy. We just happen to focus on literacy in our book, but it's applied to all academic subjects and social, emotional, and behavioral health as well. It's a way of thinking about the complexity and problems that educators face in schools and taking action to resolve those so that every student becomes a reader. So that triangle or pyramid image that represents the MTSS framework is all about using resources efficiently in a way that aligns to your student needs, so that you're not doing an intensive intervention or response to student concern when a less resource intensive response would get the same result. It's focused on prevention and early intervention and making sure that every student becomes a skilled reader. So it's really a way of thinking about and responding to the challenges that every school faces so that they can get better every single day and year after year. It is not assessing students and putting them into tiers or putting them into intervention, right? That's a really common misunderstanding, and it's missing the boat as far as we're concerned.
So I was actually going to ask you, Stephanie, what you think the common mistakes are, but I want you to say that again, because if you go into most schools, that's what's happening, right? We're assessing our students, and then we're going, we've got this many in tier 2 and this many in tier 3. Here's the list. It's yellow, it's red, it's green, it's color coordinated. So how do we stop doing that? Can you help us with that?
Yeah. So Sarah and I in the book really lay out Tier 1 as the foundation for improving outcomes for all students. And we're talking all students, multilingual learners, students with disabilities, even students with dyslexia, students who need acceleration or might be identified as gifted, and typical readers, all students. I think the action that we would recommend is, in addition to identifying individual students who are struggling, look at the aggregate data. Look at the percentage of students who are struggling in each grade level. If you have more than 20% of your students who are struggling or at-risk readers at any grade level, you will not be able to effectively intervene with that number of students. So this is where people get themselves overwhelmed. If all they're doing is universal screening and then giving interventions to the students who score below or well below on screening, they're going to flood their intervention system. They're going to overwhelm it to the point where the educators are overwhelmed and frustrated, and students aren't actually growing. So the alternative that we lay out in the book is to look at the percentage and to use the percentage of students who are on track to design the Tier 1 instruction that students in that grade level need. Many people are taking the approach that we're going to purchase a program and we're going to deliver it to everyone, a whole group, out of the box. Especially when it comes to the word recognition skills, we think this is a mistake in most cases, and specifically in the cases where there's a wide range of word recognition skills or a lot of students who are struggling readers. So not having this rigid conception of every student who is, at the expectation on screening can't get intervention, but that we should be responding with a system of supports that matches what the students actually need, not just some rigid delivery of an adopted core program.
Yeah. And as we think about, agree, Stephanie, as we think about what that kind of looks like, so looking at those aggregate data, we recommend then that schools do identify, okay, what's needed across our system. So if we do have more students than we can successfully bring to reading success with our intervention systems in addition to our Tier 1, then we might look at, Stephanie gave some examples. I can give some examples from some schools that I work with this year. So, I'm getting texts and emails daily now with data from schools. And so I work with a district that had a school really dig into class-wide intervention or Tier 1 intervention, where they changed some practices, added in some additional pieces that they gave to all students because they knew it was aligned with their data, what they saw from their screening data in the fall and winter. And they saw dramatic growth this year in their screening scores, 30 percentage points of students, growth of students who met screening targets in the spring of last year compared to spring of this year. The same is true across multiple grade levels, and another district that texted me last night was telling me their data. And so some schools will just add in something more that they know is evidence-based, that they can quickly roll out across a grade level in order to immediately boost outcomes. And schools see outcomes pretty quickly from doing things like that. But it's being responsive to your data and not taking everything as an individual, considering everything as an individual student need, and looking to see what are our system level needs and how can we align our instruction and our resources to the needs of the students in our building today.
I really love that. It's another way to think about it. Like, I think this conversation really is kind of turning what we've been doing on its head. It's funny. I was talking to a school today, ironically, and they already have a core curriculum. We were out, I was talking to them about a supplemental curriculum. And what I think, and they believe in it. They think, hey, this could be a solution for some of our kids.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is that they are kind of stuck. They go, we don't have the money because we just bought all of this. We bought a really expensive core curriculum that's working for some, but not working clearly for all. And we're not making the kind of gains we were hoping. What can we do from a system perspective to begin to think about that there's not a magic bullet, that instead you will need to supplement what you have?
Yeah. So I'm sure both Stephanie and I want to speak to this. The first thing I would say is leaders need to get into classrooms and they need to talk to teachers, because when I'm in classrooms, I work with schools that have decent core programs, right? They have programs that are at a basic level, right? Like much better than anything they've had before. They are teaching a strong scope and sequence of skills that include most of what I would want to see. And it's really hard though for teachers, and for good reason, to take what they're learning through the science of reading and training that they've received, and then map that onto curricular materials that they're kind of given a very short training on maybe, and then every day they're delivering. And
Right.
so being able to taking time to have conversations with teachers about which parts of the program are you able to do every day? Which parts do you think are most important, right? Which parts are you never skipping? Which parts are you sometimes having to because there's just too much?
Right.
Where are you at compared to the end of the year? I don't think I've consulted in a school this year that's gotten to the end of their curricular materials at every grade level. And that's a problem, right? Like that alone will prevent students from being able to grow enough. And so even just starting there and then watching classroom instruction to see, right? Like, are we seeing any carryovers from practices that we probably have tried to de-implement, but are hard for teachers to know what to do instead, right? And so combining those conversations with what we see in classrooms is the first thing I would do before I introduced more change and materials to teachers who are likely already pretty overwhelmed.
That's a really good, that's a very good practice for sure. You want to make sure that you're using what you have, right? But that you also understand what the gaps are. And so you can better understand what you might need. I also might add, though, that sometimes it's not just the school leaders in the building. It's sometimes states have, really tied folks' hands that they can't actually get any other materials because it's not on the list, which I don't think is quite fair. What do you think about that? Not to get political on you.
I've described that as being out ahead of our skis, if you know that expression. Like we're out over the end of our skis.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of a mandated list of approved programs, the field is not quite ready for that yet because there really aren't evidence-based core reading programs that have a track record of getting results for students. To say that they are, or to create a list under some moniker like high quality instructional materials and to demand that districts buy them, I think is extremely problematic, actually. And it doesn't take into consideration the needs of the actual students in schools. We know that only something like 30 to 40% of our fourth grade students are skilled readers. So why would we think that a program that is designed for the on-track fourth grader would be the thing to use with everybody in our current fourth grade? So those kinds of mandates that people pick from a list, that they implement something with everyone with fidelity, just don't match the reality of the evidence base or the students who are currently in our schools.
So interesting. I did have a chance to talk to a woman out of Minnesota they're looking as a state, she's a state literacy person, and they're looking at like rolling back some of those kind of mandates because she believes that the schools know their students best. And I think that's important. So thank you for mentioning that.
The other thing that I add is that I do think, though, that what I don't want teachers to think that we're saying is that programs are bad.
Right.
I think that in time, program, right. I know you don't believe that, Stephanie. Yes, but I do, right? Like we don't want the flip to be kind of like the assumption, because there's so much that programs do, and so many teachers aren't taught in pre-service what they can do for them and why some of the components are there and how they're intended to help. And so I think that is something that also is missing in some of these mandates, like in addition to, right, the lists that might be problematic, also like the lack of help to teachers around like what do the pieces of your curriculum materials do for you and how can they help you, I think is also missing. And I mean, in everything that I see.
That's so smart. Thank you for reminding us of that. Yeah, we are not poo-pooing, the materials, right? Because we need them. It's important for us not to go too far out. And I was not familiar with the ski reference, but I love it, and I will adopt it, Stephanie, for sure. Now, when I think about, when we're thinking about really supporting students and seeing where they are, can you please speak to the importance of early identification of reading difficulties and how the actual data plays a role in supporting them?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important findings in the science of reading is that prevention is possible. We actually can get just about every student to read for meaning at the end of first grade. Like, that's doable. And that's what MTSS is grounded in. That's what that triangle image is all about. We can identify students who are predicted to have difficulty with literacy very, very early. And more importantly, we can influence that trajectory. We can influence the outcomes through what and how we teach in kindergarten and first grade. Even students who have neurological differences in the way that they're going to approach learning to read and write, even those students are impacted if we know early, we find that they are predicted to have difficulties early, and we give them intervention early. That's going to change the course of their lives and the outcomes for them. So, universal screening is one of the most important practices of our career lifetime. Having the knowledge of what level of these essential skills is important for students to have and by when, and then screening everybody in a preventative way, not waiting until a problem bubbles up in the classroom and the teacher notices it, but proactively screening to identify potential issues early, prevent them from happening, or minimize the impact of reading disabilities that might actually exist for students. So it's an incredibly important aspect of MTSS.
It certainly is. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I agree with everything Stephanie said. The only other thing I'd say to teachers is that, as teachers, when we're in a specific grade level, we tend to see the normal growth of the students who are in our classrooms. And so it's easy to see any growth as great. And it's true that growth is great, but everybody's growing. And so we need everybody to grow at a rate at an overall rate that's effective enough to keep students who started on track at the end of the year. And we also need growth for some of our students who struggle, to be accelerated so that they can catch up. And so it can be really easy, though, for a kindergartner or first grade teacher to be like, oh my gosh, my students grew so much, and they did, right? But you can't tell if that's enough for them to be on-track readers at the end of third grade without some of these other data and those conversations. And so it's just something to note, because being off a little bit in kindergarten seems like it's not that big of a deal, but that trajectory quickly grows over time, and it just kind of puts you on a trajectory that's harmful long term for our students.
Yeah. I have another question for you. We've been getting a lot of schools reaching out to us who have fourth and fifth graders that are struggling to learn to read. So they're not really reading, right? And we've got teachers who are fourth and fifth grade teachers who have not been trained to teach reading and or writing, for that matter. And they're just stuck. They don't know what to do. What do you advise a fourth and fifth grade teacher when it comes to, again, they have a class and they're mostly not reading maybe at all or on grade level. And I want to put this caveat. It's current fourth and fifth graders, which we know were impacted by the pandemic.
Well, this is a big question, because it's going to take a lot to teach those older struggling students to read. And it's going to require a multi-pronged approach. So somebody is going to have to teach them the skills that they need in word recognition and language comprehension. So some intervention system is going to need to be in place. And at the same time, students have to stay on track with the knowledge that's being built in the fourth grade curriculum, and with the vocabulary and the language through read aloud, right? So that's going to have to happen as well. And you have a limited school day. So these are tough choices, right? That educators have to make in these grade levels, but you have to do both. There is no shortcut, I'm sorry to say. However, there are some practices, some school-wide or class-wide instructional practices that fourth and fifth grade teachers could engage in that are very powerful and not that complicated. And I'm thinking here of something like partner reading with paragraph shrinking. So a class-wide intervention, everybody's engaging in a structured routine that they've been taught to do, working with a partner, but everybody is not necessarily in fourth grade text for that experience. So they are rereading text at their instructional level, could be above grade level, could be below grade level, and they are learning how to summarize what they've read. That is seems simple, but extremely powerful evidence-based practice that teachers can integrate for 10 minutes every day or 3 days a week, whatever it is, not just in the ELA block, but in science or social studies class, that will actually be a very powerful action that they can take fairly easily and quickly.
Thank you. I love the practical example that they can certainly use right away. So thank you for that. So, when I think about intervention, oftentimes I think about these lists that, again, that kids are on, based upon the data. And I find sometimes that there's some students who get stuck in intervention. So they don't make any progress, but they're continually pulled out, or there's push-ins or whatever, but that kid's name is always on the intervention list. How can we stop that from happening?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So there's a couple things that I would say right away. So in our book, we have some data protocols and agendas for teams to use. And part of that is around, one of those is around looking at your progress data. So for students who are receiving intervention, and the way that we take that is to start by actually not looking at student data. Most of the time, it runs exactly as you said, Cheryl. Like you talk about, you have a meeting, you talk about the first student, we see that they're not making enough progress. So we say, oh, what are we going to do next, right? Then we look at the next student, we say, they're not making enough progress. What are we going to do next? Then we do the third student, right? And we're all quickly drained and we're like, oh my gosh, we didn't even get through the whole list at the end of the meeting. Exactly that. Instead, one easy change that schools can make is to look instead by intervention group and say, okay, what percentage of the students who are getting the same intervention are making enough progress? And if that number isn't pretty high, like 80%, definitely more than 50% of students in that intervention aren't making enough progress to close the gaps or to meet their goals, then we're not going to look student by student. That's an intervention problem. It's not a student problem, right? It's not about the student who's stuck in intervention. It's about the intervention itself. It could be that the interventionist is pulled to sub constantly. It could be, right? It could be that we have so many students who need intervention that we're cutting our intervention period into 2 blocks and serving 2 groups of students, or have some students who go to intervention Monday, Wednesday, others Tuesday, Thursday, right? And we've all been in schools that do this to serve more students. In reality, if students aren't getting enough intervention, they're not going to close the gap. And so I think that's the first piece, is to let your data tell you what's effective and not. And then the second piece that I would say is that we also, on the flip side, and this is a little bit different from your question, but there are multiple schools that I hear from sometimes that are taking students out of effective interventions. So they'll get to their winter screening, they'll use fall screening, and they'll group students and they'll have students in interventions. And at winter screening, they have some students who have closed some gaps. They aren't caught up yet, but they're growing, and they'll say, oh, we need to replace this student and get somebody in who's lower. In reality, don't do that. Let's start there. Don't do that, because we did the hard part. The hard part is finding exactly what's going to work for our trickiest students. And so once we find that, don't stop, because we have other students with need. Continue that, and we can continue to kind of work our way at kind of narrowing down for those students who are the trickiest what's going to be most effective. But the way to start that, I think, is by looking at as a system level and figuring out, is it really the student who's tricky, or is it that we haven't quite been able to do something with our intervention system that's going to be effective.
So when you're thinking about all of those students, like, I also want to know how you think MTSS and structured literacy work together in a way that can close opportunity gaps. But I'm thinking especially for our students who have historically been underserved in reading.
Well, one of the foundations of the MTSS model is what we call flexible service delivery. It's the idea of bringing down these silos that we've constructed in schools so that we just look at the student and we just look at the resources. We're not caught up in the labels or the funding source, so that we're sort of looking at every student in the context that they are learning to read within. And we are saying, okay, in our system, what are the resources that we have available to bring to bear for a student who's struggling with this particular topic or issue? So not thinking about students as, well, here's what we do for our gifted students, and over here is the person who works with our students who are eligible for Title I. And this is an instructor who is working with students with disabilities. And none of those people or students can ever cross. That is something that we have constructed in schools, those silos, which are not helpful. They are not serving any of our students. So I think we've talked about some of the really most important concepts of early identification and early support to all students, regardless of the funding source, the title of the person working with them, or the eligibility status of that student.
Yeah. I agree. And the other thing that I would add is when you think about the MTSS as the framework for using your resources, and Stephanie already mentioned flexibly, right? It's to meet the learners in our building today. And so if we have, for instance, a large number of students who are multilingual learners, then I'm going to make sure that our tier 1 includes the language, like routines for teachers to use during their literacy block, right? During that literacy instruction, that's going to make the language connections. Last summer, I worked with a district, and that was one of the things that was around tier 1. And that was one of the things that we noticed was that their routines in their program that teachers had didn't include explicitly those pieces. And they had to have some multilingual learners in their system. And so we just added in the pieces to make connections to, okay, what this word is, right? Like giving a brief definition, asking students what that is in Espanol, and then saying, oh, is that the same or different? And we just added that brief kind of addition to their routines all back in tier 1, so that their tier 1 itself would meet the needs of students. MTSS, it shouldn't be something that's just like processes, forms, and meetings. It's really intended to be the infrastructure that can help drive the success of your literacy program. It's not intended to be a separate thing.
Oh my gosh. I hope that gets highlighted in your entire statement. Really, again, what I love that's happening in this conversation is that you are really you're really encouraging people to think about it in a different way. It is really, it's a framework to help all students. And it really, and the way we've been using it, again, it is really a lot of lists, a lot of meetings, and we're not seeing the gains. We have to stop being insane and doing the same thing and expecting something different, right?
That's right.
That's great. So, we've got lots of school leaders and literacy coaches that listen to Literacy Matters. If one of them is out there listening today, what's one action step you'd encourage them to take immediately?
So for school leaders, one action step, can I say 2?
Sure. You can cheat.
Okay, I'm going to cheat and say 2. Get good, direct curriculum-based assessments in place. You have to have direct, brief indicators of essential skills, curriculum-based assessments like Acadience Reading, Dibble's 8th Edition, Ames Web, FastBridge. Those are examples of what I'm talking about. You can't do reading improvement without those kinds of assessments. So if you don't have them, that's a good first step. If you do, then the first step I would suggest is to get a team of people together to look at those data, to talk about the needs of your system. Specifically, ask teachers on that team, what's in your way? What are the reasons why you're not getting better results in your classroom? Ask the teachers that. Make a list. And the team's job is to create action plans to remove the barriers for teachers to be more effective in their classroom. That's what I would start with.
That's great. I love that. It reminds me of some conversations I've had with Leslie Zaroya on the show, talking about, again, making sure you've got your assessments in place, but also coming up with a team and figuring out what the needs are, because then you can identify it. And I love that you're involving teachers in it. It's not a top-down approach. It's everyone involved in this. It
Yes.
takes a village, right? For sure. What advice would you give our school leaders or literacy coaches, Sarah?
Mine is similar in that, like, let your data tell you where to go next. You can read all of the books, including ours, and you decide, we should focus on this, or we should focus on that, or we should, and every system is different. And it's not that you won't identify right things, but the thing that's going to make the most difference for your school tomorrow might not be the thing that's in that book, right? Or that conference that you went to, whatever that is. And so let your data help you identify what that is. So I would lean into, as Stephanie said, data, using all of the pieces that she mentioned. And then I can just say, tier 1 all day long is where you're going to see the biggest results. But I just second everything Stephanie said too. If she didn't say universal screening and using those data, having a plan to use those data, I wouldn't have said that.
Got it. So now, if you could leave one nugget that would empower our listeners to better support their children to become strong readers and writers and speakers and listeners, right? What's the nugget you would leave?
Regardless of the past results you've seen and the past growth that you've seen from students, your students can learn to read at high levels. And the things that we do in schools are what achieve that. But in order for it to happen, it's not just all on you and an individual teacher. It's really on the system to empower you, to support you, and to really and make.
Sarah and I have been hanging out too much because that's exactly what I was going to say. That's really funny. It's really funny. You can get universal literacy. The teacher is the most important variable within that equation. It's their responsibility to make that happen. And they cannot do it alone. They need the systems in place to support them. So yeah, we're totally lined up on that.
Love that. And why do you think literacy matters?
Well, it's access. Access and opportunity is what literacy provides. It makes a future possible for students. It's the absolute right of every student to have it, and it's our responsibility to make it happen for them.
Love that. What about you, Sarah?
Stephanie stole my answer. So my second answer is, and the rest of school is so much better. If I were in a job that I was bad at and that I knew I was bad at, and I was told you have to be here for 12 more years, I would quit. All of us would quit, and our students aren't allowed to, but they show up every single day and know that they're the worst at this job that they're at. And it's heartbreaking, but it's also something that, everything Stephanie said first, but the second part is their job for 13 years is going to be way more fun.
That just gave me chills. I've never really heard it quite that way, but it is so true. And imagine, can you imagine a kid that has decided I can't learn to read and I really want to quit, and they're in the first grade? They've got so much more
I've had
time.
Second graders tell me that they know that they've said that they're the dumbest in their class.
It's tragic. And go ahead.
No,
it is tragic.
It's tragic, and it doesn't have to be that way. That's what hurts so much about kids who have that experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what? And it doesn't have to be that way for teachers either. They don't know how to teach it. They can also learn. That's the other thing that I think is beautiful, is that, no, you didn't learn it, or you learned it a different way, or you never learned it at all. Hey, you were a seventh grade teacher and now you have to teach first grade. You can learn how to teach, in a structured, explicit manner that really makes a difference for children. So,
and teachers are learning this, and leaders are learning how to support them. And it's really, it really is a super exciting time in education.
I agree.
Awesome. I have thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with you all, and I have been really inspired to think about MTSS is a very different way. I will never look at the pyramids the same, and I really appreciate it. And I hope our listeners feel the same way. Where can people find you or follow your work?
So my website is the best place to find my social media and my blog and my Reading Science Academy membership, and that is www.readingscienceacademy.com.
And Stephanie, I love your blog, by the way. That's how I found you. That's how I started following you.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
How about you, Sarah?
No, it's great. Her blog is fantastic. All the work Stephanie does is amazing. My website is systemimpactconsulting.com, and you can learn about the work that I do there. And then I offer a year-long MTSS Data Academy for leaders and schools to really apply the work of their structured literacy and science of reading work through an MTSS to see actionable results.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Hopefully our listeners will seek you guys out. We really appreciate you being on the show, and thank you for all that you do for teachers, students, and families.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Cheryl.